after watching last night's debate, Bryant, who won?
Well, I think Joe Biden clearly came away with a better performance. I think he was on message with what American people are concerned about today. They weren't concerned about many of the things that Bernie Sanders had to say, which was simply a rehash of his previous positions. I think Americans now are more concerned about the economy, coronavirus, whether they're going to live, whether their health insurance is going to cover all of the testing and treatment for this coronavirus. And that Biden seized on with great success.
Yeah, I mean, Biden's argument was, none of that matters now. We have to deal with the immediate crisis, which is true. But Sanders' point was that if we had a better healthcare system in place to begin with, which was able to coordinate all elements of healthcare better and more seamlessly, then we would have been able to contain an outbreak like this much more quickly and effectively. Now, doesn't that argument have some merit?
It might, but we don't know. The problem is that we had such a hodgepodge of efforts in terms of what happened in China and stopping the flow of people coming from China in that 6 or 8 week window before we suddenly realized there was a real big problem here.
Yeah, with the incubation period.
So that's my point. I think if we had moved more quickly to the Chinese problem, then we would have less of an exposure than we do now.
Well, wasn't Trump being criticized initially for when he finally did block flights from China?
Oh yeah, I mean the health officials were after him right from the get-go, and they just ignored all of that for at least a month, and that's created the problem. It certainly made it worse, and I think there's no amount of backpedaling that's going to change that.
Brian, what it seems to me is that the biggest gain for Biden in last night's debate was that he seemed together, he seemed coherent, he seemed competent. He didn't stammer, he didn't stutter, he didn't lose his place. To me, that reassures the public that he's not a doddering old man, that he is mentally competent and equipped to assume the presidency. To me, that was the biggest takeaway for Biden.
I think you're right. And don't forget, Biden has always done well in one-on-one debates, not in that cattle call we've had for the past few months, where you had 13, 14, 12 people yelling over each other, and nobody could take home a cogent message. So last night you saw 2 people debating, and you saw both at their best in terms of presenting positions and making arguments. And that's where Biden has always done well.
Yeah, I understand that in one-to-one, he's much better. It's much easier for him to project his message, to concentrate on all that. However, that doesn't explain last night's stellar performance in comparison with even his stumbling and incoherencies during campaign appearances of late. I mean, how do you explain that sudden difference? I was quite surprised.
See, I don't think his campaign appearances are that disjointed. It depends on, what you're looking at. Did you look at the whole picture, or did you look at a 20-second soundbite and not realize what was going on either side of it? So whether he looked more coherent, more targeted, more focused, as compared to what his campaign appearances were, is questionable. I don't know.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of the truncated sound bites that especially Fox has been using chops off the extension of the statement where it explains what he's referring to. So, I mean, there's been a lot of that manipulation, taking things out of context, juxtaposing things and making it look much more disjointed than they actually are. But still, that being said, he just seemed a lot smoother last night. Now, part of it could be what you say one-on-one, but I still found it quite surprising.
Well, I think he was prepped to the hilt. And I think they got him in a room and worked him over and said, this is what Sanders is going to do. And you have to be preemptive in what you're going to say about him. And the line about choosing a woman vice president completely took Sanders by surprise. You could see he was reeling at that point. And even when he was confronted with, are you going to choose a woman too? He refused to make it absolute. So I think that's the type of thing that can help Biden in primaries yet to come.
Well, the way I see it, though, it appeared to me that it was obvious that Biden was pandering to the woman vote. Now, whether that really damages him with the overall electorate, I'm not sure. But to me, that exchange, Sanders came off as more principled because he wasn't going to commit himself just out of political correctness. But whether or not that really damages Biden in terms of the total vote, I don't know.
Look, I think that Biden understands one thing. The enemy is Donald Trump. And I think that choosing a woman as a vice presidential running mate cannot hurt him in that panoply of facing Trump. And he knows that. So I don't think there's any downside to that at all.
Of course, it depends on who the woman is. Because
that's true.
If the woman is too progressive, somebody who could easily be termed too radical, then I think that might damage the vote count for Biden.
I don't think you have to worry about Elizabeth Warren being his running mate. I think that's out the window. And I think it'll be a moderate. My wife and I have had discussions about this, and we still think Amy Klobuchar is the most likely choice because she's from the Midwest. It helps with the states that Trump won from the Democrats in 2016. Kamala Harris is unnecessary because she's from California. The Democrats are going to get California anyway. There's no need to put her on the ticket. And I think if you go by process of elimination, Amy Klobuchar is probably among the better ones.
Yeah. I could see the math behind that. Now, this still growing element here of limited campaign appearances, rallies being scrapped, and how is that going to affect how effective each of these candidates are in keeping their voting constituencies interested and engaged?
Well, I think a lot's going to depend on how the virus rolls out. If we have a monumental spike in the number of cases in the next 4 or 5 weeks, that changes everything. And it will change everything for months, which puts us into the late summer and early fall. And at that point, both whoever the Democrats nominate and Donald Trump are going to have to scamper to pick up the pieces, no matter when the actual campaigning resumes in earnest.
Do you see any way that Trump gains from the situation, or is there increasing damage to him because of the increasing criticism of his alleged failures to handle it quickly and properly and effectively? Is there any way that Trump doesn't lose on this crisis?
No, he loses, period. The president can't even not contradict his own health experts. And that shows he's ignorant. And it also shows that he refuses to become unignorant. And that's a problem. And it's a problem not so much for his base because they don't care, but it's a problem for swing voters who were iffy about supporting Trump a second time. And the more of this that goes on, the worse it gets. If he continues to contradict and outright disagree with the experts who have a handle on all of this, it's going to be a real problem for him. And at some point, you can look at the people that are behind him now, and this dog and pony show putting out all the experts every time he comes out to brief the country, whether he's there or whether Mike Pence is there, is meaningless if you have somebody at the top who's throwing cold water on everything that's said.
Well, he's less and less resistant now. The health experts that surround him are getting more vocal, and he's actually adjusting his positions now and pretty much glossing over his previous stances and going along with what they're saying, is he not?
Well, just Sunday, he said the virus was contained. I mean, you can't say things like that. It's anything but contained. It's not contained. It won't be contained until we know how many people are infected and what to do about them and where to put them until they get better. And to make broad statements like that without any scientific basis in fact is just nuts.
And the argument that he's just doing that to tamp down panic, is that something that's legitimate for him to do?
I think we've got panic pretty much going on right now. All you got to do is look at the effect on Wall Street to see that. And every time he opens his mouth and says something more ridiculous, there's a reaction on Wall Street. It's axiomatic. And at some point, somebody's going to have to whisper sweet nothings in his ear and say, shut up.
Bryant Thomas, longtime newsman and commentator, most recently of the AP News Bureau in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us once again.
You bet.